Good morning and good evening, depending on which country and time zone you are dialing in from. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I am the founder and executive director of GlobalSF. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the New Economy Conference organized by GlobalSF and co-hosted by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz. Starting off with housekeeping, today's program is simple. We have a panel of keynoters followed by Q&A. Should you have a question for any of our speakers, please enter your questions into the Q&A section. Please do not enter it into the chat. We will be addressing questions after the panel discussion. And before I start our program, I wanted to start off by thanking my board members at GlobalSF for being the champions of our vision and mission, recognizing my colleague, Dr. Bruce Pickering, Senior Advisor of Policy for GlobalSF and Chief Architect of this whole conference. This conference and ensuing working groups would not be possible without the partnership of GoBiz, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And I want to particularly thank Didi Myers for her leadership and to Kaina Pereira for his support. Of course, I must thank our Governor, Gavin Newsom, for being the visionary leader that he has always been. Starting off China SF after we visited China in 2005, I still remember that trip, because he saw the potential of the foreign direct investment, and we now have GlobalSF today. Our fearless Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, with whom we shared a laugh last night about the wind and chilly evening in San Jose. And to my dear friend and female role model, California State Treasurer Fiona Ma, her office, and Noah Starr, Senator Majority Leader Robert Hertzberg and his Chief of Staff, Freddie Quintana, Kate Gordon from the Office of Research and Planning, California Forward, Milken Institute, Stanford University China Program, and the Los Angeles Economic Development Corps. Our dedicated working group leaders who worked tirelessly before and after each working session to make sure we have something concrete and actionable for the state of California. And to our amazing speakers who I don't have enough time to list, but who made every single public session so very interesting. Did you realize and or remember that we had 2 Nobel laureates join us from both sides of the pond, I may add. And remember, if you miss a session, you can still listen. Check out our website at www.globalsf.biz. We also have a weekly podcast to address topics that we think are relevant, and those are ongoing. And most importantly, the staff at GlobalSF who have made sure that everything worked and looked good. I think I finished my thank yous for now and leading today's session. And believe me, it didn't just take a village. It actually was a statewide effort. And so the topic and theme of today's session is so resourceful, so future. Number 6 and last in our New Economy Conference for 2021, our work is just beginning. Indeed, California will be successful coming out of this pandemic, without a question. We always make things work. With a population the size of the whole country of Canada, we managed our pandemic well, our COVID numbers are low, we are reinvesting into our economy. Our governor committed $14 billion to economic recovery. Each city and county now in the state is scrambling to make sure they are ready for reopening come June 15th. But how and what is normal? We had convened 5 working groups following each public session since we kicked off this New Economy Conference in April to discuss and identify pain points and solutions to economic recovery and sustainability. In particular, we have to confront the uncomfortable issues of housing and equity, diversity and inclusion, labor and talent, innovation and business retention, competitiveness and relevancy in an increasingly transparent and challenging global marketplace with supply and value chain concerns. These are all challenging issues and top of mind topics that we have to address because we are the first destination of choice for so many people, whether American or immigrant. California is the land of innovation, and I still remember what Oxford professor Ian Golden said in his session. The world is watching California. Everyone is waiting to see what we do to come out of this pandemic. Absolutely no pressure, right? As they say. To talk about those issues today and provide their thoughts on next steps to take, we have California State Treasurer Fiona Ma, State Senate Majority Leader Robert Hertzberg, Laura Tyson, and I'm so glad she could join us today. And we are grateful that Jonathan Wetzel is able to join us again from China. To start, I have the pleasure of introducing Kaina Pereira, Senior Advisor on Business and International Trade to GoBiz, to provide his thoughts on behalf of the Governor's Office. Kaina.
Thank you so much, Darlene. And I really just want to thank everybody who's been a part of these programming sessions, and really just want to state very clearly that our governor is committed to an equitable recovery, and the conversations that have gone on over these past sessions have been instrumental and will be instrumental in achieving some of the goals that we have in the future. Knowing full well that there have been and are existing challenges within the state, it requires a statewide effort, but a regional sensibility to be able to address those challenges. And a lot of the discussions and topics that have been presented over the previous session really address those items. And so we're really hoping for a robust policy discussion to come out of these conversations, as well as some actionable items that will be presented by our distinguished panelists. And hopefully we'll get through both either budget cycles or legislative cycles through our distinguished guests. And very much so, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this and part of the programming, to partner with you all as we've developed what was initially a regional focus, but has turned into, quite frankly, a very robust statewide effort. And we're very pleased with the results. And we hope that the information that comes out of there leads to real actionable items on both the executive committee, executive branch, our governor's office, and the governor's office of business and economic development. So with that, I'd like to thank Senator Hertzberg and Treasurer Ma for today's program, as well as Laura and Jonathan, as well as GlobalSF, and the entire crew has put on what is going to be, in my opinion, a replicable and valuable set of conferences now and into the future. Thank you very much, Darlene. And I just want to leave as much time as possible for what has been an amazing conversation over 6 sessions, and know that this conversation will continue. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you. Kana, it's been great and a pleasure to work with you on this statewide effort. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And next, I am honored to introduce Senator Robert Hertzberg, a doer and not a talker. Definitely my kind of guy. Senator Hertzberg.
Thank you. Well, I'm off. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. Thanks, and thanks for inviting me back. I was in session number 1. This is session number 6. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? That's the most probative question. And you know, this New Economy Conference has occurred over 7 weeks, starting on April 21st was the first one. 5 sessions, 26 speakers, panelists, keynoters, a lot of distinguished people, as indicated by Darlene, 2 Nobel laureates. What we're going to do here today is kind of more like a fireside chat, where we want to take our distinguished participants and come together and think through from the experiences of what we've learned through all of these various conversations in going forward among these sessions. I want to first thank Bruce Pickering, who worked for me when I was Speaker of the Assembly as the head of the Office of International Relations. We had so many countries coming through California. I grabbed him out of the State Department because we needed that level of experience. And Darlene has been my friend forever. Ever. Thank you guys. Thanks for putting this together, and thanks for including me. The sessions, the first session was addressing challenges and opportunities in post-COVID California. Second, the international dimension. Third, investing in the new economy and keeping business in California, critically important. 4, sustainability and urbanism. 5, navigating Chinese investment, trade, and technology. And now we're at 6. Where do we go from here? There have been workshops for each of these sessions. And I want to start off just briefly that helps inform our thinking. I pulled out from the notes of the key takeaways and themes that was summarized from here. And I just want to quickly read those because I think it'll help inform our thinking among our panelists. The 7 recurring themes. 1, California's resiliency has been challenged and found wanting. The state must take risks to change its trajectory. 2, the state should play to its strengths. Diversity, inclusion, and immigration are all important components of California's recipe for success. 3, state government cannot treat regions with cookie-cutter approaches. Huge state and regional needs are different. 4, the Central Valley, Inland Empire are very important for the state's future. 5, upgraded infrastructure, education, retraining, broadband are critical to the state's future. 6, regulations are burdensome, more than taxes. 7, ports are a bottleneck. Companies are rerouting away from Oakland and Long Beach and infrastructure upgrades are necessary. So I share those as we begin to have discussion. And I want to start, I will introduce all, and we'll start with the Treasurer of the state of California, Fiona, who's been my friend for a long time. She's doing a great job as treasurer. We work together extremely closely on all sorts of legislation and issues relating to finance and creative approaches to using the power of California's money in its STRS and PERS and all the other kinds of facilities to come up with creative solutions. Jonathan Wetzel, I first met at Vincent Lowe's Hotel in Shenzhen, Shanghai. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but it was a long time ago. And he's, in addition to all of his work with McKinsey, it's been extremely important in the Los Angeles region. We have had a series of meetings with the LA delegation, 38 members of both houses of the legislature, thinking through challenges that are unique to the LA region. And he's been our very sage advisor. And Laura Tyson, who I've been working with for, 12 years now, Laura, on the Think Long Committee, and works with Nicholas Perguin and so many other things. In addition to her work with the President Clinton as a council of chair of the Council of Economic Advisors after the Clinton administration ended, her energy and interests in public life and public service and the public good has not changed. She went off to the UK for a while to be president of the London School of Economics. She's now back at Berkeley, serves on a number of boards, been deeply involved with us thinking through challenges facing California, and has just never walked away from our underlying DNA, which is public service. And so with that, I will turn it over to our treasurer to make some initial introductory remarks, and then we'll go to each of the panelists, and then we'll have a kind of a conversation among us as informal as we possibly can, back and forth, and I'll try to be a catalyst for that. So with that, the Treasurer of the State of California, Fiona Ma.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Darlene, and everybody who is on the call today, as well as my esteemed panelists. I look forward to this conversation. I don't know about you, but when I think about the last 14 months, this pandemic affected everyone in the world. Everyone in the world. So what does that mean? That means we are all connected all around the world. And that's why this conference, I think, has created a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, because the pillars, the topics that we all discussed, the working group comments reflects everything that is happening, not only to the United States, to Canada, but all of the nations collectively. So I think one of the themes that we saw is that we cannot rest on our laurels. If California is going to remain the 5th largest economy, we need to be innovative, we need to be creative, and we need to be visionary, which is why we're very excited that Governor Gavin Newsom has the vision. He sets bold and audacious goals, as we all know. Sometimes we reach them, sometimes we don't, but at least he plants the flag far enough where all of us, if we are going to be serious about, California and leading the nation, leading the world, we need to all work together and strive together. So I'm very excited. I led the third panel, Investing in California, Retention of Business. I think we all need to be very honest about what's going on. And Bob Hertzberg, he's like me. We've been elected elected in different offices over the many years, but we don't sit in our office. We get out there, we go here, we meet, we visit, we listen. And that's the way that our elected officials, our business leaders, and everyone else who wants to move California forward, we need to get out and meet with the real people. So I'm very excited because this conference has allowed us to do that, to get different perspectives from all over the world. And as we know, Jonathan is in China right now. China's facing similar issues, but we need to learn how to be global partners, work together. And with this Biden-Harris administration, I look forward to better days, to those days when we had international students, we were able to travel and exchange, have cultural exchange delegations and trips. That's what brings the world together. And so thank you all for allowing me to say a couple words, and I look forward to participating in this panel today.
let me turn it over to Laura. Any thoughts, Laura? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and now
Okay, good.
you can hear me. Hello. So I have been working on California issues for the last several years, back to Think Along with Robert, but in the past year, I've been co-chairing what is called the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. The concept here was to set up something similar to the National Government's Council of Economic Advisors group of academics, not connected to any, there's no agenda here other than providing the best objective advice on the state of the economy and on helping think through the various ways that California can support sustainable long-term growth. Interestingly enough, when we were established, the focus really was on long-term growth and competitiveness and the business environment. We, like everyone else, was overcome by COVID. So for the first several months, we were involved in providing advice on economic policies related to COVID. I'll stop there, except to say that the broad functions we have served are, number one, advice on the budget, both the macro foundations of the budget, the projections on which the budget is based. We have provided advice on what we think the broad categories of spending for a sustainable long-term growth should be, what areas of spending, what kinds of programs. It relates very much to what Robert said was, I think, item 5, broadband, labor, infrastructure, sort of the foundations of long-term growth. And I would put ports there, actually, because that's part of it. So we've been sort of thinking about these budgetary choices and advising on those. We do think about it, and I was very sorry that I could not attend, and definitely want to listen to the discussion about the business climate in California. We established a subcommittee to look at that, but frankly, so far, our subcommittee work has progressed much further on forest resilience and climate resilience, where actually we were very involved in helping think through the budgetary choices on that, and also on workforce training. And I would say I would link that to community colleges, because workforce training is a continuum from, really, I would say, the wonderful decision of the governor on preschool, which is, I think, incredibly important. But there's a lot of investment in workforce training. There's a lot of investment in community colleges, and we thought that was very important. Another area for business development was a focus on broadband, and very happy to see the extent of the commitment to that area. And finally, let me just mention something that doesn't get mentioned enough in business environment, and that is small business, because essentially California is like the rest of the country in the sense that most employment, about half of the employment, is in the small business category. A lot of that small business is really kind of very badly hit by COVID, really strapped for financing. I want to applaud the governor for the grant programs for small businesses, but also working with the Infrastructure Bank, which is another real asset of California that I think we should focus on. We've created a new small business loan facility. It's called the California Rebuilding Fund. And I believe that will be a permanent structural change in the financial architecture of California. It's just another mechanism whereby small businesses, particularly in disadvantaged areas, particularly underbanked, non-banked or unbanked, can get loans for their small businesses. And I think we have to think about, as we're thinking about the business environment, always not just the big corporates and the big tech firms, which are really important to us, but also the small businesses in California. So let me stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate it. And I failed to mention your role as the co-chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. I figured President Clinton was a pretty big one, but this is a big one today too. Jonathan from China.
Thanks, Bob. And yeah, real pleasure. Always a pleasure to have this conversation and to be part of it. And I'm honored to be so. I mean, what I took away from the 5 previous dialogues was, first of all, a sense that California is better on offense than on defense. That we're better when we're going forward and when we're innovating and creative. We're not a state that likes to play defense, and maybe we're not a state that's all that good at defense. We're good at the creative sort of, if this isn't working, let's try something else. I think we worked our way through COVID, and now we're at the end of it. But we have to keep that spirit and double down on it. I think that's our strength as a state, and sort of the capacity to reimagine, to recreate, and not to build back, I have to say, but to go forward. To think about those industries of the future, the things that can anchor us in the 21st century, to think about the skills that can anchor us, as Laura's very importantly been pointing out, so how does that affect each and every Californian, and the businesses of the future. And as Laura just said, those businesses, we shouldn't be overly focused on the businesses of yesterday, even if they're very big. We need to be thinking about the businesses that could be the businesses of tomorrow, which tend to be small today. So every small enterprise is a potential unicorn. That's our opportunity as the state. That's what we're good at, is creating and nurturing the environment that fosters that. And yes, we've certainly had our problems. I think that was what was coming through, is that how do we, go back to the days when, yes, this is where viewed as the most business-friendly environment in the country. This is the place where if you want to grow a billion, to create your dream, this is where you come to it. And I thought against that, there was probably 3 things or 3 levels that came through to me. One is that we at the state level, and we very much emphasize the statewide nature of this dialogue, but at the state level, there is an opportunity to potentially to strengthen what we do as a state, whether it's around the financing of our investments and the development of the state, whether it's around the infrastructure that ties us together as a state, or it's in the services that we provide as a state to citizens and for that matter, representation abroad. That overall, there's just there are opportunities here. So there's an agenda that does genuinely sit at the state level. The second thing that came across was the regions. And I think there was very clear that we have at least 3, and I actually think 5 regions across, and they are very different. And there is a reality that a regional infrastructure is a thing, that the certain investments, notably around infrastructure, but also around employment and housing patterns, they're regional in nature. They need to be thought at a bigger scale than simply going from the state right down, to the district or even the county. So that there is a need for that thinking about what ties a region like the Central Valley together, and how do we create the virtuous cycle of economic development, of unique institutions, and put our money where our mouth is around that as a region. And then I think the last level, of course, is the local level, where all of this doesn't happen unless we actually change our neighborhoods. And we change the places where we live and work. And that means we change the things that are making it more difficult for us to play offense. And of course, the cost of housing really came out. That's probably the single biggest reason why people feel it's difficult to realize the dream. But of course, it's not only the housing; it's the integration of housing, employment, and infrastructure, and the capacity to have a better life for your kids, and whether that's a healthcare issue or education. So all of those changes. So those 3 levels: state, region, and local. We need to move in parallel around an agenda for getting California and continuing to drive on offense. So we are. We got pushed back down to the 3-yard line. We came back to midfield. Now we need to go for the touchdown. So.
Well, great, Jonathan. That's happened to us a few times throughout our history, and we've always come back because we've got the core elements here. Let me start with a couple of things I want to raise that were raised in your discussion. this notion of reimagining California. And as Fiona suggested, Laura suggested about the pandemic, I mean, the question is there's some really significant impacts of this pandemic, not only about who it affected and what that looks like, but this whole idea of working at home. I see a tremendous amount of articles on that where companies are not coming back full time. What does that look like? It has huge impacts. CB Richard Ellis, that you served on the board, in terms of office space. Are we going to have as much office space down in areas? What does that do for property tax? Because those buildings aren't going to be out there. We have legislation to convert those buildings into housing, office parks, and commercial buildings to housing. What impacts that has on our policy on vehicle miles traveled and the pollution issues because people are working at their homes. What did it do for purposes of the issue of childcare, where you can take care of your kids at the same time you can continue to work? It really has, you know, I was talking to the mayor of Sacramento, and he says that his population increased last year by 40,000 because people like in San Francisco that are pissed off about the homelessness and the high costs of housing and the like have come to Sacramento because they can work remotely. So the question I ask is, there's been a lot of discussion. Do we think, and we'll go through this, I'll start with Laura, do we think that this element with respect to working out of your home, you know, we all have been talking about this future of work. We did a future of work commission. There's been a ton of books about it. Has this really been a catalyst where California could lead this, which then has all sorts of ramifications in terms of dealing with so many other issues, whether it's the neighborhood issues, the regional issues that Jonathan talked about? Laura, thoughts? You're on mute still, Laura.
I think it's a very real. I think there are permanent changes that are ongoing. I think that there will be, for many companies, they've already announced that essentially a hybrid model where maybe a couple of days a week people would work in the office and the rest of the time they would work from home. McKinsey, as usual, the McKinsey Global Institute has done some really interesting work on this topic. And clearly what the companies are saying is we have digitized everything as much as possible. We are dealing with more automation as much as possible. We are dealing with hybrid. Those are major ways in which companies responded to COVID, and they're not going to return. Okay, so your point about we have to think about the future, it's not the past, because they're not going to go back. They've made these investments, and they are indicating they're going to make more investments. I mean, so if you ask, there's a business investment boom that's going on, and I think a lot of it is going to be in particularly when it's involved with production. It's going to be production with automation, and then you have all of the logistics. I think there's a really important area here to consider for the economy, and that is this is an explosion of the logistics and warehousing support of the way things are done. So you asked the question of, you know, so how does Cvre see the future of office space? What Cvre would say is that in major metropolitan areas like San Francisco or New York, there's still uncertainty. Literally, I want to say there's still uncertainty, okay? It's also true in San Francisco that you have uncertainty because it was such an important conference center and business conference center. And will those conferences come back? How do businesses feel about the need for those? They may feel don't need it. Okay, so that's a specific, the leisure, travel, hospitality, business client, which I think was very important to San Francisco. I think there's uncertainty about that. I just want to be completely. On the other hand, where there isn't uncertainty is the explosion of warehousing, the explosion of digital capabilities. All of that infrastructure, all of that building is just zooming. It's just zooming because it reflects the changes in the way businesses are doing business. So that's how I would basically sort of handle that first question. Uncertainty about the traditional use of office space, particularly in a city like San Francisco or a city like New York, and that in San Francisco exacerbated by the travel, tourism, business services, but this other, but definitely not going back in terms of automation, digitalization, and hybrid, not going back. And so we need, therefore, to think about implications. One implication is the explosion of logistics and warehousing. So let me
Interesting.
stop there.
Fiona, I want you to put on, in addition to your hat as treasurer, you have, in addition, you kind of remind me of what Jess Unruh did. You're still on mute, Fiona. What Jess Unruh did with the treasurer's office and take it to a whole new level in terms of a very aggressive approach with finance and all the kinds of innovative things that we could do with your office, with the legislature. You're always doing 20 bills where, a lot of constitutional officers haven't done that. As I listen to what Laura says and this larger discussion, maybe as the treasurer, and particularly with finance, and if you kind of put your legislator hat on for a minute, in trying to inform, because the idea is, where do we go from here? It's one thing for us to talk about it, but I listen here, and it seems to me that we need to have a discussion, and maybe you're the right person to lead it with a bunch of legislators that says, okay, how do we need to change policy, right? What does this do with the vehicle miles traveled rule? Because if you're not doing vehicle miles traveled, what is this going to do to the tax base for offices? Boom, boom, boom. What is this going to, and each one of these policies for childcare and all of these other things, and how do we pay for childcare? What does that look like? Because the notion is it's not just a real estate issue, that it has a much broader implication, that we might have to re-engineer a lot of the trajectory that we as a legislature have been engaged in. And I don't sense in this body that there's been a lot of that thinking. So I want to pass that to you and get your kind of instincts on that.
Yeah, so thank you, Bob. Besides being the banker and investing and issuing all the bonds, I also chair 15 boards and commissions that funds affordable housing, schools, hospitals. And I've really tried to bring all of my folks together to think together in a team and help move together projects instead of being in silos, which is what traditionally happens even in the legislature. Like, I believe that we have lost that sense of family, right? Where kids live with their grandparents and then they were raising the next generation so that you could have two parents going to work because you had grandparents that were home taking care of, the kids. So can we build communities, right? Affordable housing communities where they are multi-generational, where you have senior living, because sometimes seniors like to live, with other seniors, and then you have families, and then maybe you have, disabled communities, but they're all together and not segregated, because sometimes you need childcare, sometimes you need a little help going to the grocery store, sometimes you fall, you need someone to bring, some food to you. So can we build these intergenerational facilities? I'm also working on building student housing on community college sites.
Yes.
Developers don't want to do that because of the transient nature of community college students, right? They sometimes stay, they transfer, they don't pay a lot. So can we combine that housing with senior housing, where seniors can also go to take community college classes? They can babysit so that students, single parents, can go to class and take care of each other. They can go volunteer on college campuses, because seniors like to stay busy as well. I live with my father, who's 85 years old, and he is busy. He is independent and busy, but sometimes people need something to go to, right? Hey, come and volunteer at the bookstore. Come and volunteer, at whatever, just, welcoming students. And I think we just need to think outside of the box and not continue to do what we always do, is these cookie cutter solutions to bigger societal issues.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think that it would be a good idea if we maybe did something in the legislature to share some of those ideas to enlarge the thinking of what we're talking about. Now, Jonathan, you talked about regions. This is something that actually Pete Wilson did, and he did a thing where he divided the state into 9 regions. When I was speaker, we had the Commission on Regionalism, and it was always perceived as kind of adding another layer of government. Cities didn't want it. Counties didn't want it. They felt it was bureaucratic approach versus an intelligent, a thoughtful approach to the difference that one size doesn't fit all, which was mentioned in some of the earlier sessions. Maybe now it might be a good time to reinvent that, given the new challenges by virtue of housing challenges that we face. Certainly the things that we're talking about to do housing, we're not going to be able to impact in San Francisco. It costs $40 million to buy 6 square foot nothing burger place in San Francisco. It ain't happening. But there's a lot of other places where it can happen. That the point that Fiona made about her going to Palmdale, huge opportunities in terms of creating a real industrial center. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of people. Some of this money we're talking about with infrastructure and all the cash the state has, there's real opportunities to really take the place to a next level. Just your thoughts, just to develop a little bit more on the regional piece that you talked about, because I think that that's in terms of where do we go from here? If we can kind of reinvent the work, and what does that mean in all the public policy areas? 2, finally take a serious non-bureaucratic approach toward regionalism. Thoughts?
Well, as always, Bob, an inspiring and entrepreneurial approach. I kind of think that, that's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, any business person looking at the state of California would say, well, where would be the right place to invest where you could get the lowest cost entry point to the most amount of innovation and creativity? And the answer would be somewhere in the Central Valley, or the Inland Empire, or somewhere essentially that we haven't invested that much before. Not coincidentally, prices are actually relatively low because of that. And so this is from an economist perspective, it seems like that's where you would want to actually start. And then you'd examine, why hasn't that happened? What's holding us back? And I think a lot of it comes down to fragmentation. It's just too difficult to invest. It takes us, in some people's opinion, it takes as long to do a small thing as a big thing. So you just go after the big market. But if you manage to favor the small market, so that the small market was much more efficient, was much more available, and you did some things like you aggregated these markets, so these markets are allowed to work together. And we already have structures like that. I mean, the COGS, like SCAG or ABAG, I mean, that they are ways in which we associate across these smaller marketplaces to create at least some version of a plan. But then actually executing that or attracting investment, that's something that is not done at that regional level. That is sort of, once again, back to a free-for-all for every independently defined unit can go for themselves. So I think that as we think about why this might work, it's first of all getting more scale, so you get more access to capital and you get lower cost capital, and it's also about recognizing that regions are special and that they bring different characteristics, and that for some regions we should encourage and incentivize development around their competitive advantage. That could be, obviously agriculture, but it also could be around, infrastructure and unique assets that they have. Importantly, around education and institutions of higher learning. These are scarce assets. And so simply by demonstrating that every region, and particularly the ones that have been held back, should be getting those institutions, and that we should be, consciously biasing people to invest in them as a state. I think that there would be a tremendous appetite for the private sector, and a tremendous improvement in the quality of what's going on for everybody in those communities at the day-to-day level. I love what the treasurer said about reshaping the fabric of the neighborhood communities, intimately linked to this, and that it says that we have opportunities in places that are trying to attract investment to sort of to attract that in the way that makes sense for those communities. And that's one of our values as Californians, is that we respect the diversity and the inclusive nature of our state. And we want that to be part of this regional conversation, is that we are not going to this is not a trade-off. In fact, this is additive. By creating institutions that support regional development, we are also going to be enabling communities to set their own path and to create more opportunity, create more economic, social, and environmental opportunity.
Madam Treasurer.
You know what Jonathan said, like sometimes it's difficult to invest. I was just out in Adelanto last Saturday, and they have a new mayor who, like, born and raised in the district, never thought about running, is tired of the reputation that that city has had, wants to put them on the map. They hired a very aggressive city manager, and they can commit to permitting. They actually outsource their permitting department within 3 to 5 months. And they want to attract businesses that are not able to locate. They love big manufacturing. They're welcoming, the Boring Company just moved up there. General Dynamics, a lot of cannabis companies, and that's how they're generating their revenues, getting out of their deficit so that they can help finance warehouses, right? Aquanetta Warren in Fontana, she was labeled Warehouse Warren, and now she's laughing all the way to the bank because everyone is coming and Fontana is doing great. So I say to people always call me, right, Bob? And they always say, oh, I want to be in San Francisco. I want to be in LA. I'm like, why don't you start in the smaller cities? The smaller cities are the ones that are hungry. They have, structural deficits. They need to generate income. So I go around the state and I try to figure out which cities are easier to do business in, right? Regulations, as you said, Bob, people don't mind paying higher taxes if they can cut through the regulations and the red tape and actually have a community that wants them versus fighting. And we see this in affordable housing. Why is affordable housing so difficult to build? Some communities don't want it, even though we need it. And what happens is that, especially during the pandemic, people have lost their jobs, they lost their cars, and now they're on the street. And it's so hard to build housing. Nobody wants them in their backyard. Local governments make it more difficult, the red tape. So, we need to kind of reshape how we think. And I really do think these smaller cities, counties that have not received a lot of attention from government in the past are the ones that are ripe. Hence Central Valley, Inland Empire, the High Desert, San Bernardino, Imperial, Coachella. Those people are all open for business. They welcome people to come, but it's just not sexy for people who are from outside other states, other countries. They always want to be in the big, cities because they think that's sexy, but it's harder to do business in those big cities.
Laura, I see a hand. Laura, you're still on mute.
Well, I get on and off mute regularly. I want to say that I'll play off the last term that Fiona used, which is sexy. I think we have to realize that basically, in thinking about regional development, does the region have the talent? Does it have broadband? Does it have transportation, easy transportation, logistics, getting in and out to whoever your customers are? Does it? I think we need to think about all of those things in thinking about regions. I agree that we need also to realize that they're underlying the difference in regions is the difference in sectors. What actually is their competitive advantage, or where do they? And I think that is important because it's going to differ from region to region. So we can't have a general regional strategy. I think you have to have a strategy which sort of looks at the underlying composition of that regional economy. If we take another area that is obviously very different across the state, and it's very controversial, but I will just say, and that's water. Okay, water. If you're talking about regional development, water. And let me give another controversial one. We know that we are going to be, in a variety of ways, trying to close down traditional oil industry. That's what we're going to do. We want to do that, okay? And we're trying to move as aggressively as possible to a renewable base, okay? That has implications that are different for different regions. I mean, I actually think we need to, at the Council of Economic Advisors, we were talking a little bit about, okay, if you want to think about Biden's success so far in thinking about what to do in coal, and getting the miners union and West Virginia to agree that there's this long-term plan to bring down, reduce dramatically to disappearance at some point, the coal industry. Well, you actually have to make investments in those communities to help that transition. And so there's a really good example of certain parts of this state are going to be hit by that. And what do we do in terms of talent development, broadband access, trying to encourage the development of alternative energy companies in those locations? Finally, just let me say that, just to reiterate, because a number of people have said this, when I talk to businesses, so I've talked to two different kinds. So small businesses have one set of problems. They're basically serving local markets and their demand collapsed and they didn't have access to funding. And so as demand comes back, that with funding, with the grants, with the loans, they are recovering. A significant number of them are gone, but a significant number are recovering, and new entrants are all over the place. I see them locally all the time. Okay. So that's one kind of business, but there is the issue of what to do with the innovative. Your statement, Bob, about every potential small business is a unicorn. So what do we do there? What more can we do there? I would say is important. So those are just some thoughts that, the final thing is, whether it's small business or large business, what I have heard about talent, about people, is housing. It's housing. It's not regulation. It's not taxation. It is my employees, the talented that I want to recruit to this location. Let's say one of these cities that Fiona is talking about. Okay. Is attractive housing available at a sensible price relative to that place? And what about the quality of the schools? Because I want to emphasize that for a lot of the talent we're talking about, let's say mid-20s to mid-40s, a key consideration of where you want to be is the school system in which your children are going to go to school. So this community housing school issue in terms of trying to build out alternative non-traditional locations is really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is great. I want to kind of pick apart a couple of the things that were said, because I want to get to the end and have at least some roadmap of where do we go from here in some practical form. So we've done this notion of rethinking this work issue and what we've got to do there, the regionalism piece, kind of updating it. I'd like to see your report on the work stuff. I'll send you, Jonathan, the Regionalism Commission report that we did. It was over a year long effort. I wanted to address kind of the larger issue that was threaded through everybody's comments about how difficult it is to do work and what we talked about in earlier sessions. And that is Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe had this great quote. He was this great architect from Chicago, and he always used to say, God is in the details, not the devil, God is in the details. And what I find is that when we look at this issue of taxation versus regulation, the like, one of the, and this is a place where I think we have opportunity, is what we do is we say, oh, let's do something, and we hand it to the bureaucrats. When I started my solar company in South Los Angeles on Martin Luther King Boulevard and Alameda, where opportunity met social justice, and then I left California to go to Cardiff, Wales, where I put Mickey on the board, it wasn't because it was crappy. I couldn't fill out the forms. I had to commit perjury to fill out the forms. They were so long. We just did this. Here's a document that we just did this whole big bill on evictions, right? This is a 36-page document you have to fill out if you're a landlord and want to get your $32 from your tenant. The people, the apartment association says, it took 4 hours to fill out. Nobody wanted to fill it out. When we did Cal Works back in the 90s, when Clinton did his, shifting on the what's it called, the welfare, not to know it. You were there for that, Laura. We had a 43-page document. We had 150 people after we did CalWorks with the Ironer fill it out. We have this extraordinary talent with Code for America and all of these people who can translate this bureaucratic bullshit into kind of simple, accessible stuff. What was Steve Jobs' brilliance? It wasn't inventing the computer. That was Woz's brilliance. His was the fonts and the accessibility and translating it. And so the idea here is, what's the road forward? Where do we go from here? What's attainable? We're not going to build 10 new Golden Gate bridges in the next 6 weeks, but what we can do is to change the level of thinking to make stuff much more accessible. The governor wrote a book called Citizensville, talks all about it, but example after example of stuff that I've seen, and that we have opportunities here when you talk about small businesses, when you talk about what's happening at Fiona and these couple of small cities that you've been to. It's all about making it super simple for folks and not allowing the 36-page application. And this is what I'm dealing with right now and trying to update the situation. And there's so many of these examples. The same thing happened when we were trying to do the grants for small businesses. We say, oh, we're giving all these grants. What does it look like? I picked up the phone and I called the people, the phone number for the thing if there's evictions. I got recording for the long time. Then I got an answer that says, oh, go to our website. I go, well, I'm calling you. I don't have a computer. I'm old. And they said, well, call this number and you can come into one of our offices. Which offices? We don't know. Where are they? We don't know. It's like, are you kidding me? So the point is that when we look at inventing the future for California, we look at the experience that small business have that you talked about. What I'm trying to come out with at the end of this conference in section 6 is this notion of where do we go from here. We clearly can have some direction on redefining what the new world order looks like according to work and what that means on policies. We clearly can do the regionalism thing in a much more elegant way. And I would suggest, really taking an effort in partnership, maybe with some of our tech people who we can sit down and they can come up with ways. Code for America took a 39-page application some years ago and reduced it to 1 page. There's ways to do that in a much more elegant way. And the other thing I would suggest, what Laura said, that we have to highlight in terms of what's unique for California is this transition from oil. All the economic opportunities, that has to be highlighted. We're in the middle of it. We set all these guidelines about energy and the environment and all of these other things that we do. We need to really focus on an intelligent, we're doing it, but in a much more understandable way in terms of like, what are the top few things we need to do? Clearly, this transition away from oil, the impacts locally, and all the various things that were just articulated by the speakers, to me, needs to be a thing that goes on the top of the list, and how we can fill in the details of how we make that transition, because we're there. We just have to smooth it out where we need to smooth it out. And the last thing, and I'll turn it over to everybody else. I know Laura read this in my book, was this home, was where the wealth is. I'm working with Fiona's office, Tim Schaefer, Deputy Treasurer, and the like. I just sent him the memo from Oric Harrington that we're doing on coming up with a $25 billion down payment assistance. Basically, what we do is, there's a lot of people, you back into the number. Home ownership. Home ownership means you don't have rent control, because after 10 years, you had a fixed rate mortgage, your payment's the same as it was in year 1. Home ownership means that you deal with this underlying issue, which I think, and I'll turn it over to you guys, really informs this sentiment that came out of, one of the big sentiments that came out of the pandemic, is this essential worker, the rich poor divide. You see these numbers of people with companies making trillions of dollars and people hurting even more. If you're gonna deal with the architecture of democracy, which is confidence in government and making sure there's opportunity for people, rich people can get rich, but poor people got to get rich too. And the home ownership is where the wealth is. And so we're talking about, with Fiona's office, put something on the ballot in November 2022, 25 billion, it could be 50 billion, it doesn't matter. It's investor money. And the idea is to silent second, and then the investor splits the profits like they're doing at the universities with the homeowner over time. But the homeowner actually has a chance to own something, have a piece of the community, at the same time has an opportunity to build wealth. So with that, I'll turn over to you first, Laura, and Fiona and Jonathan to add some more thoughts. But I'm trying to create some architecture around this close of what are some of the big plays that we could leave everybody with, of what actually is realistically and doable. Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I just want to applaud the notion of having this fund idea for home ownership. I completely agree that one of the glaring inequities it was already there, it was already glaring, but became even more glaring, was the wealth inequities that have occurred during the past 18 months. And home ownership is the key form of wealth that most people hold. And we have, our national policies actually help high-end homeowners. They don't help low-end homeowners. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So our savings policies do the same. All of our national policies are really not well focused to help wealth creation for those at the bottom of the income and wealth distribution. So I'm a big fan of this, and I think it's a very important innovation. You mentioned the importance of the digital core. You know, I do believe that the governor has put into the budget in a number of places investments to digitize, to bring up to closer to frontier the use of digital in the provision of government services. Of course, we had a glaring hit in the face about our not being at the frontier through what happened in the unemployment insurance and EDD system. Okay, we saw, okay, firsthand, if you don't make this investment, you could risk a ton of lost money. Okay, so I think this is something that the Council of Economic Advisors, the Governor's Council, really was very much in favor of. Yes, put in this money for digital, and then actually have, there's now, I think within the government, they were going to set up a sort of cross-cutting, cross-agencies task force headed by someone, I think at the Department of Finance, to make sure this happens, to make sure that these investments are ongoing. So I would put those two things in terms of just playing off your questions about what can we do. We must improve. Look, I love what Fiona said about you can do it by sophisticated digitization of services, but she also talked about an individual who basically is being able to get the permits going in a few days. Okay, there's a human dimension to this too. So that was really wonderful. So I would just emphasize that. You know, there is a conversation going on, and we haven't discussed it here, but a number of cities are talking about basic income experiments. And when I think about that, I tend to think, boy, it would be those resources, it's costly to do that. And you have to think about, well, where will those resources come from? I would rather see some kind of investment fund of the kind you're talking about, Bob, to actually help people generate wealth than a transitory payment of to help them deal with the fact that they're not employed, they don't have a living wage. I think we have to think about all this, the livable wage, living wage concept, as well as the wealth creation concept. But when we do that, we have to think about the fact that we have to, where are the revenues for these things going to come from? So that's
Fiona?
Yeah, so I have a couple of two things I want to just chime in on. Number one, home ownership. I think that is key to the American dream, right? That's how you build equity. I advise all of my friends, you know, we have a Cal HFA program, RC has a first-time homebuyer program. Veterans, I've issued 4 tranches for the Veterans Home Loan Program. And that I always push to everyone who is renting at this moment. But I was you know, a homeowner since I was 22 years old because my parents started saving for us since we were born. They would put money away, they invested in dividend reinvestment stocks. And by the time I finished college, I still had money left. And my parents said, you can use it for graduate school, to start a business, or to buy a home. And I decided to buy a 2-unit building in San Francisco. And, you know, we all know home ownership is the key. If we want to keep seniors living in their homes as long as possible, we need to figure out how to support that. That's why I'm a big supporter of like Airbnb, ADUs now. If you are a homeowner in the state of California, you now can create an ADU. That's an accessory dwelling unit in your home, or a junior ADU, which is within your home. But we can't finance them, right, Bob? And that's,
We got it this year, though.
I know. And so that's what we're working on, is to allow people to borrow up to $150,000 to build a rental unit. Once they generate income, they can show that on their profit and loss. They can go to the bank, they can refinance, and then pay it back. And so that's the program that Bob and I are working on. I want to just pivot back to what Laura was saying about the oil and gas industry. Similarly, when military bases pulled out of the state of California, it devastated so many of these small towns, and they weren't ready for it. They weren't prepared. And that's where I think we're seeing a rejuvenation. I asked one of my ad hoc committees, Angelo Farouk, to please head up my military base revitalization plan, right? A lot of these were federal property. They don't know what to do with it. They're sitting there in the state of California in certain communities. Can we better utilize it? And it takes coordination and it takes leadership. And so Angelo Farouk is going to be doing that for me. And then when it comes to solving problems, I really think we need to use more actual working people like Laura, who is heading the governor's task force. When I ran for state treasurer, I oversee the two finance programs, the tax credits and the bond program for affordable housing. Developer after developer said the programs are not working, the regulations are outdated, there's too many applications, nobody is talking to anybody. And so I said, fine. I convened a group. I said, who wants to volunteer? And 30 people showed up for 14 months. They came up with the regulations changes. They came up with the competitive system that we have, how to allocate our resources, the points and the tiebreaker. And whenever they couldn't come to consensus, then the 3-member board, the board that I chair, would make those big policy decisions. But it has worked out great. And since then, I have one executive director overseeing both programs. We have a joint application for the first time for bonds and tax credits, also working with Cal HFA. We are now streamlining our Excel spreadsheet. I know everybody wants to go to technology and online portals, but they're slow. Sometimes they don't work. And so let's go back to what we know best, Excel spreadsheets. Let's make it easier. William Leach is launching that project for me. So we just have to figure out how to make processes more efficient and effective. And we don't have to go through, billion-dollar computer IT contracts. We can just do it based on what we know and what's here today.
Excellent. Jonathan?
Well, I mean, these are all, I'm inspired. Thank you, Treasurer. I think that those are, that gets me going here. And I like to just build on it a little bit, to think about, what will that California economy look like and that society look like in 10 years? I think it's always nice to envision success and then work backwards from that. And so what we know is that we'll all be a lot more productive, for one thing. Each and every Californian, will be able to do more, and we'll all be have the infrastructure that we need to be that much more productive. And finally, everything will be faster. I want to sort of the last point is really, for me, a kind of critical sort of thing that we don't have any time to waste. And if we're going to actually achieve the standard of living that we hope for every Californian, everything will get faster, because people will be on the move. People will be using much more information. People will be making many more choices about where to live and where to work. And our systems will have to respond to that, particularly our government systems. I have contracts with the state of California that require a wet ink signature to be hand delivered. It's like, okay, I'm not sure that's really going to work. So, I think that's the time aspect, and sort of putting a value on the time that it takes. Businesses in general are not investing less because of the cost, but simply, again, because it's too hard to invest. So because it just takes too long and there's too much uncertainty about it. So reducing the uncertainty, creating a safe space that guarantees that you won't get sued, and that if you put this application in, there's a reason why there's a 36-page form. It's like there's a whole lot of codicils and legal protection. So there is actually a question here of how does one balance all of the things that we have pass laws about, saying that you have to comply with X, Y, Z, or the other thing, and the desire to actually speed things up. So, I mean, that's where the magic words "by right" come in. It's like that, because we think this is very important, we are going to make a safe space for it. And I think that kind of innovation around the important things, around the things that will genuinely create a better life for all of us, for our communities. For me, that's probably one of the biggest themes. I want to add just two other quick things. One is on education. I mean, and skilling, and what we mean by that. We have to just rethink what we mean by education. I mean, from my point of view, that this is, we all are going to have 2 or 3 careers now. And so that means we're all going to need to learn things in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And as a result, a system which allocates 85 to 90% of the educational expenditures to the ages under 25 is simply not fit for purpose. That there will need to be a rethinking of what we mean. And that, for adults, we know includes employers. And so that's how they learn. They learn by doing things. And so how do we engage that broader the employers in the education conversation? And importantly, recognize that people, as they're adults, they're very fragmented. They don't have, the 8 hours a day to think things through. So we're going to have models, which we already start to have, but that sort of is a real reimagination question/challenge for delivering education to everyone about everything, everywhere. That's one thought. And then on the housing side, as you know, Bob, this has been a passion, and I totally agree with what Laura is saying, that this is the foundation. A house is more than a house. A house is obviously a wealth creation mechanism, but it is fundamentally where you sleep at night. And because we humans need to sleep somewhere between 4 and 8 hours a day, doing that on the street is every day is obviously unsustainable. So, I mean, I think this very much implies a reimagination of what we mean by housing. And that final point, I mean, and I think that we should tie that to our values. So we've talked about wealth creation based on residency, essentially, continuity, that we are going to incentivize you to stay in a place longer. And if you stay there longer, we will give you a down payment. We'll give you some support to create access to wealth. I mean, that's fair enough. Why not? But why should we only be incentivizing just continuity of residency? Why not sustainability too? Why not diversity too? Why don't we say these are the things that if you do this, we know it's a public good. We know this is supporting the state. And so why wouldn't we give you an incentive if you are going to behave in a more sustainable way, or at least not charge you for the costs of other people's unsustainable behavior? So I would just put those out there as being sort of corollaries to what we were talking about. Again, going back on offense, saying these are our values. We believe they lead to higher productivity. We're going to change the regulations. We're going to create a safe space for innovation around it. And we're going to actually put money against it.
Laura? You still have me.
I want to just emphasize the education point a minute, because I was very, we talked a lot about this at the council. The governor did commit a significant amount of funding to we have a large number of worker training programs in the state of California. I think one of the issues we felt is we don't have really good metrics to evaluate their outcomes. Okay, so basically, if we're going to design worker training programs, we need to be very careful to collect the data and analyze their effectiveness. However, one thing that I think came through clearly to us, and this is the importance of community colleges. The apprenticeship programs, if you look around the world and you look at, or even in the United States, at places where apprenticeship programs have worked, frequently, most often, there is a community college involved. There's a community college involved, working with the business community and working with nonprofits and working, but the community college is always there. Okay, I think so. I would say, I would just this little codicil to what Jonathan said. It doesn't worry me that much that a significant amount of our education dollars go to the college system, the community college system, And I would say what we're trying to do here, of course, is give workers at several stages in their life the opportunity to get credentials and apprenticeships through a community college approach. So I just want to, I think that, look, we've been leaders in this. We have the largest community college system in the world. It is the scale provider for training. It is a scale pathway for people to improve their career trajectory. And we need to do more on apprenticeships, working with industry in those community colleges, and also more for the students themselves. I applaud completely, Fiona, by the way, the building of housing for community college, because one of the reasons we have, students enroll and then they cannot complete. Okay, so our problem is not enrollment or interest, it's failure to complete. And the failure to complete is because of the cost, the opportunity cost of being there, the cost of housing, the cost of everything else, of childcare, all of those things. So we've got to work on those things as well. But I just want to do a high five to community colleges and to education in general. I think that California, I mentioned, I think the adding of preschool as part of the educational trajectory in California is incredibly important, because we know all of the evidence suggests that you fall off, if you're not at preschool, you fall off at third grade, you fall off at fifth grade, you fall off at eighth grade, that trajectory of success in education and career trajectory starts in the 3 to 4 year olds. So I just want to say that I think that is very important. So now, obviously, I'm in the education field, so I'm going to believe in the importance of education. I will say that the Council of Economic Advisors is mostly academics too, but we are really convinced that this continues to be an area where the California has been at the forefront, and we need to stay there. And obviously, we are not at the forefront in the K through 12 for reasons where we're not talking about those right now, but that's a key issue, I would say. Because remember, I said people worry about the quality of the schools to which they send their children. So if they're going to move to these other cities, is the school adequately funded? Can they actually get a high quality education for their children? If not, maybe don't move there. Maybe move to another state. Anyway, key issue.
Fiona, any thoughts? I want to open up questions. Any other thoughts?
Well, I would say, I and Bob, we're focused on problem solving. So if there are problems that have been around that are insurmountable, send them our way. That's what, excites me every day. That's what motivates me to do what I do here in government. Government cannot compete against the private sector, right? And people always say, why isn't government more like business? And I said, well, business, when they're doing well, right, they're always focused on the bottom line. And when they're not doing well, what do? They let go of their people. And what happens then? Everybody comes to the government and provides, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, health insurance. And so we are more of a safety net. But if we could work better together, collaboratively, and not in a combative mode, that we both, business and government, have important roles in society, the more we can create success pathways for individuals, the less they may have to, depend on government. But government workers are there every single day. We are essential workers. We are valued. We may not be working for the government for the stock option or the bonus. We work mostly because we care about, doing what we do every day, but also for the retirement, right? And so there's sometimes different motivations for what we do, but we all have a role in society in making California great. And you can see during the pandemic how essential government workers were during this pandemic, right? Health care workers, frontline, firefighters like my husband. And so, I just appreciate this dialogue, and I just hope that we both, value government and the private sector, and we can find ways to be creative and work together moving forward.
Perfect. So I think that getting back, staying focused on what the deliverable here is, where do we go from here? As Jonathan says, defining success. What's the definition of success? Randall Stevens used to say that all the time, Laura, in your old days at AT&T. That was what he always used to say. And so what we've identified here, obviously there's a lot more issues, but I think the top line are the following. One, rethinking work, given all of the new challenges that are faced in the post-COVID world and what that means and so many of the policy avenues that we've chosen to do. Two, a much more thoughtful, additive approach, as Jonathan says, to regionalism, and as Laura talked about, the unique nature of particular areas. What are their competitive advantages, and have not just having this broad bureaucratic approach, but a real diagnostic of what that means. Third, which I like to say is God in the details. I would suggest it's more than the digitization, but it's really requires a partnership, I think, which wouldn't be very hard to do with places like Code for America. There's a number of the groups at Stanford, Berkeley, and other places where you can sit down with different interdisciplinary approaches and try to define things in ways that work. Stuff that I'm trying to do now with the evictions, I'm just offloading all this crap to a one-page judicial council form that meets all the requirements that Biden put in, meets all these other requirements. It doesn't put the burden on the landlord so that they can get their check, and a process to be able to get them a court order that gets them a check so people have confidence and the tenant doesn't get hassled. Third, obviously, is the whole kind of, as Fiona was talking about, Laura, the whole BRAC idea for transition from oil. Really, it's clearly we've had these before. If we take a more integrated approach to this, I think that just like we've done with the BRAC process, it could be incredible. The housing finance piece, which we're working on now, that's going to be on the ballot in November 2022, assuming we can get it passed in the legislature. I'm going to send you guys, Laura, I'll send it to you too. I'll send Jonathan the memo I just got from the lawyers today that outlines the term sheet, if you will. I've already sent it to you, Fiona, to kind of get your insights on that and make sure we get it done right. I think this issue of the 113 community colleges, the fact that we always have retrained, all of us keep getting retrained, and this whole idea, I like the word skilling that Jonathan used, that deals with that, also building housing on community colleges, those institutions being important. The governor's really made that a huge priority, as he did with respect to preschool already. So when you look at where the money went, that whole issue has been, the good news is a lot of that stuff's been funded in the surplus that the governor has done in his proposal, and that we have done the legislature in our proposed budget. So I think that's a pretty good chunk. And I think a lot of that stuff is deliverables. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that are on the way, stuff that Fiona's doing in her office, stuff that we're getting to happen in the legislature. And I think those are in what the governor's done with respect to his budget and some of his programs. Because one of the things is often in these conferences, we get out there and we talk about this pie in the sky stuff. Everybody says, great, nothing ever happens. We've got to get to definition of success and deliverables and figure out practical avenues to get there. Otherwise, who gives a rat's? Write another book. So that's the thinking. We've got a few more minutes. It's 11:19. This goes to, I think, 11:25. If anybody wants to put a question in the chat, I saw Claudia, remember you from the old days, mentioning something. If anybody has a question that they'd like to ask any of the panelists or offer some suggestions, if you could put it in the chat, we'd be happy to consider it.
Can I just also add, Bob, while we're waiting for questions, you know what Jonathan said really struck a chord in me, that we are better at offense versus defense.
Right.
That is so true here in California. I am a member of the California Earthquake Authority, and so earthquakes are top of mind, right? We don't know when the big one is going to hit, but it is going to hit. So we right now are lobbying the governor, lobbying Congress for more infrastructure money to help building affordable housing building owners to access more seismic safety retrofit money. And that's never top of mind, right? It's always, okay, let's get, money for fires or floods and hurricanes, but earthquakes, we just need to think about some of these things that are going to happen in the future and play a little bit more defense sometimes. So thank you, Jonathan, for saying that.
Let's talk about that. We tried to do that last year on the Brace and Bolt program with your office. It was kind of a creative financial approach, but we got tanked by the insurance industry. Welcome to our practical world. Laura?
I just wanted to say that playing off something Fiona said and what you said, that Fiona mentioned how in solving problems, you can go to the community, the business community, and they can help come up with a solution. You know, I've been really struck by the Council of Economic Advisors is totally pro bono. Much of the task force the governor put together, totally pro bono. People really were willing to spend time trying to think through solutions. So I actually think on this whole digital, you know, Code for America, we should reach out, and I think you'll get responses. Sure, I'd like to help solve that problem. Let me, you know, it's not going to take that much of my time, and I'm a member of the state and matters to my community. So I just want to applaud the notion of there's a lot of talent out there that I think you could mobilize from the tech community, from the business community in general, to help deal with the devil in the details, the God in the details, getting the details right. That's all.
Yeah, and I just plus one to that. I mean, I was in housing again in Los Angeles. We had Triple H, which you know, when we got around to doing a challenge grant for that, lowered the cost of housing by 60%, the delivery by 60%, just because you were telling people, this is what I want you to. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm just going to tell you what I want. And then you figure out how to do it. And then actually, surprise, surprise, you got a lot of innovation and a lot lower cost. So I think, yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Okay, in the chat, we have both Claudia Lynn, a friend from LA, who talks about hospitality industry going forward. What's the Olympics look like in 2028? Green Industry Initiative. And then David Nia, who used to work for Vincent Lowe back in the old days, and now he's back here in San Jose. How do we overcome local government barriers for state level from state level initiatives such as developing housing on community college sites without cities changing general plan policies? We just passed a bill on that off the Senate floor, David, this week on doing that exact thing to supersede that. But anybody have any thoughts that want to answer either Claudia's or David's inquiries?
Sorry, go ahead.
Good. Okay, so in terms of housing, we were just on a phone call yesterday with the governor's housing folks saying, listen, we have general RHNA numbers, we have housing goals. However, there's still some communities that don't want to build any housing. Like, what can we do? And in this May in this May 15th budget, the governor is actually putting money into more enforcement, a whole unit that can go and educate local governments about what the laws are, because as Bob knows, we're a full-time legislature. We have lots of laws that are passed all the time, and sometimes it takes a while for local governments and city attorneys to really catch up. But they're now going to be doing that proactively, going out there and letting folks know these are the housing goals. We need you to abide by them. And if you're not going to, then there is going to be enforcement and ramifications. And so that's what I think California can do to ensure that local governments are abiding by many of the mandates or laws that are passed by the legislature.
Yeah, and can I just, before you go, Jonathan, I just want to say something. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who's a land use lawyer, and he developed a housing project completely consistent with our laws that we required in the mandates under SB 35 Wiener and under Skinner's Bill 330. And the local city council person denied it. He went to court. He's going to win, and there's consequences. And he'd send a message in terms of that issue. And also, I got another here from Drobnik. Dick Drobnik. Oh my God, look at this! I didn't know you were on the line. Good seeing you from the old days at SC. This is for Jonathan. You mentioned that California needs a state, regional, and local approaches / plans. Do you think that California should also have a global or at least Pacific Rim approach / plan? Dick Drobnik from USC.
Yeah, I put a quick answer in the chat, but I mean, I think first of all on the on the idea of housing, I'm quite partial to the RHNA process. I think it is a slow-moving train that ultimately crushes opposition. So, or at least it encourages people to sort of get real about what actually is needed here. And I think there'll be a real moment here over the next 12 months about when people are putting plans out that are nominally meeting RENA goals, but in reality, that you can't build on that tiny little triangle of space. So, I mean, it's going to be a very intense dialogue. And I think that's one of the big themes here, is that to keep that dialogue going, we need to build capacity. We need to build capacity at the state level. If the state doesn't have the capacity to push back on NIMBY, it's not going to, the RENA thing RENA won't work. So I think it's really an interesting moment. On the global side, yeah, I mean, clearly, as the 5th largest economy in the world, you know, we should have a global presence. But it's not for its own sake. It's because it builds our own competitive advantage, and we should be very mindful of that. And I personally I don't think necessarily, you know, trade offices face to face is the way to go. I think that is a very sort of expensive way of creating a global presence. Yeah. But there are a lot of things that we could be investing in, digital infrastructure particularly, and leveraging the diversity of our state. You know, we have the most diverse state in the country, if not the world, in terms of ethnicity and language. So how are we using that to help SMEs in particular, small and medium-sized enterprises, go global? I mean, we should be the capital of exporting from small and medium-sized enterprises, and that would be the priority, I think.
Laura?
Actually, I was going to ask the panelists response to the last question, which is the CEQA question, because I honestly feel like the evidence I've tried to review on this leaves me uncertain about the impact of CEQA on the competitiveness and development of California. So I wanted to ask Bob and Fiona and anyone else if they have a view on this. I think this is because it relates to an earlier question about the green economy and the connection the state is making to climate. And on that score, I would say that you know, I think the state gets full marks for being a leader for many decades in this, and we will continue to be a leader. And it's interesting, you know, the governor had committed before the Biden administration infrastructure plan on the building out of electric vehicles and capacities and the infrastructure implications of all of that. We're there. So I would say, in terms of environmental policy, at least related to climate, I'm involved in now a couple of committees looking at state government procurement based on looking at carbon emissions of the procurers, of the companies from which the procurements are made, all sorts of things. But I still don't have a sense of CEQA. So I think it's an important question that was raised.
I'll answer. Fiona, do you want me to take it? I'll start off. Look, I mean, this whole environmental stuff started under Earl Warren and just for public buildings and went to private buildings with litigation and the like. The bottom line is this, and this is the horrible statement. The California environmental issue is critically important to all of us, and people agree with it, but it's been used as a tool, as a weapon. The neighbor up the street that doesn't want your development because it's competitive will file a lawsuit. Some of these groups that just want to get attorney's fees or whatever file lawsuits. I think, and I'm thinking about doing this next year, is to do a CEQA court so that you have real environmental lawyers, real environmental judges that know the difference between the BS and the reality where people are just leveraging you. Where a court will issue, if a city says, okay, you got so much time to do something, to issue an order to show cause to the city after 120 days when they said that they'll do it. Basically, take the leverage out of the process and adhere to the important environmental tenets, because the challenge with the CEQA process, now that's point one. Point two is that we in the legislature have done extraordinary things as best as we can under the political climate on CEQA. For example, on the housing stuff, any construction over $15 million goes expedited, like we did with all the big stadiums. We just did it on a whole host of bills. We're doing the same thing with respect to converting office buildings or shopping centers. So we're trying to have some expedited process, but that's really, in my judgment, small ball, because we're expediting the appellate process. We're not getting to the core of the issue of, and look, one of the big arguments, the elephants in the room, is labor. I believe in labor. I believe in paying folks. if I could constitutionally do something that said every one of these buildings gets, fair wages, skilled and trained, I would do it if there was a way to do it. In the housing thing that we're doing for the ballot, every new construction is going to be skilled and trained. So people who can actually afford, the workers can afford to buy their own houses. So aside from that, the leverage stuff's got to change. And that's what drives everybody crazy. And cities just, oh, it's an extra 6 months. Oh, it's this. Time is money, man. And have somebody who holds their feet to the fire, create a sequel court, and tell the truth. Bottom line. I don't know what you think, Fiona, but that's pretty out there. I'll probably get beat up for that, but you know what? It's the right way to do it.
Well, I think we all need to come to the table and communicate, right? Be honest with each other. And unfortunately, people like to stay in their corners and point fingers, and then nothing gets done. And so I think better communication, more stakeholder involvement, trusting each other. I think when you trust your partners, then you're willing to compromise and give a little bit. But until that happens, we're not going to kind of move forward on many of these big picture items.
Yeah, I agree with the statement about the CEQA court idea. I think that in principle, one could say CEQA is fine. The problem is it takes, 36 months to litigate a decision, and that at that point, people just don't, again, the time, the uncertainty deters investment and raises prices, which in some cases is precisely the outcome that is being desired by the person instituting the CEQA appeal. So, I mean, this is pretty logical, actually. So if we want to change the result, we're going to have to change the process. And
That's
I
right.
think more resource can make a difference in this case, more judicial resource. Mm-hmm.
Because see, developers don't want to go back to the city and say, you told me it would be done July 1st. And now, sorry, sir, it's not, or ma'am, it's going to be September 1st, because they don't want to get upset. If the court intervenes and says, you promised July 1st on order to show cause, that if you didn't do it, now the city is responding to the court, not to the person. If there's a proceeding that's filed that's completely bogus, the person is trained. I can't tell you. I remember going to court. I wrote a book on real estate law and a thing called lis pendens. And I got to court, and a judge had been a judge in a criminal case. And it's like, this was critical to the person I was representing. And he goes, lis pendens, I don't know what that is. I don't remember that from law school. I've been doing criminal stuff. And like, you want to die, right? And what happens in the same thing with the complexities, everybody is cautious appropriately on environmental issues, but somebody who knows the space can say, that's real, that's not real, and avoid this game that gets played that just leverages you out, which then frustrates the bejeebies out of everybody. And I think we're out of time. If I gather that Darlene is on, she's probably telling us enough. Hopefully we gave you enough for this with all these brilliant panelists, Laura and Jonathan and Fiona. Thank you guys for participating and letting me be included in this as well.
Geez, Senator Hertzberg, this was amazing. This was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for leading it, and it's been a treat. So thank you. I want to say to Treasurer Ma, Laura Tyson, and Jonathan Wetzel for your insights. Communities open for business, i.e. the CEQA court or permit expediting, enabling small businesses, increasing housing, being creative to bring together public and private sectors, going back to the basics and not making things difficult with digitization, which was originally designed to make life easier, right, as we all know, and building upon the strengths and innovation, which is definitely our defense, our offense, excuse me, because we are so innovative and we're not a defense economy. And also because we're a state of diversity and inclusivity, because the rest of the nation and the world, for that matter, is watching us to follow our lead. And the God is in the details. So let's put all our thinking caps on and work together. As I mentioned earlier, our work is just beginning. We are fleshing out projects, programs, and policies. Send us an email if you want, info@globalsf.biz. In the meantime, please check out our podcast, www.globalsf.biz, and stay in touch. Thanks again and have a great day. And to all our panelists and participants today, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be in touch. So stay tuned. Thank you all and have a great day.